Hello, college sports fans. You're listening to the College Sports Superfan, and this is the biggest game of the week, arguably one of the biggest games of the year. This is our fourth top five matchup this season. Pretty interesting to see so many of those big matchups in the regular season, and a big part of the reason why is because of the super conferences that we now have. But this is a massive one between number four, Ohio State, at number three, Penn State. And you look at the two teams and their numbers across the board, very, very similar. Points per game, points allowed, yardage allowed. It's all very, very close across the board. One interesting note of this game that everybody's going to be talking about is Drew Aller's health. He went down with a knee injury. Didn't seem to be a major knee injury on the road against Wisconsin last weekend, but he did still suffer that knee injury. Even if he does end up playing instead of quarterback Paul Perbula, you wonder about Drew Aller's health and mobility against Ohio State. So as a result, the Buckeyes on the road are a 3-point favorite. The over-under is 45.5, so it's expected that we'll see some offense, but also some really great defense. Let's talk about Penn State first. Quarterback Bo Prabula did not look that bad against Wisconsin. He actually took control of the offense. He was running really well. He was passing pretty solid. He did not look like a very bad backup quarterback at all. But going against Ohio State with their elite defense, that's a whole different animal. Ohio State, on the other hand, they surprisingly struggled against Nebraska. That game was very close, much closer than many thought it would be. Nebraska was coming off of a 56-7 beatdown to one of the best teams in the country, Indiana, which is still very weird to say. But they got a 56-7 beatdown. Ohio State was coming out of a bye week following their loss, their 1-point thrilling loss to Oregon, which was one of the biggest and best games of the season. So Ohio State was coming off of a bye week. You'd think coming off a bye week, they would be more prepared and would play better against Nebraska, who literally was just beat down badly. But the Huskers were in the game the whole way. The Ohio State offense really, really struggled. Maybe it's a wake up call to this Ohio State team. We'll just have to see in this game. But let's start with Penn State's overall offense. Talked about Bo Perbula. He was looked really solid there, and he hasn't done too bad in the very limited action. Drew Aller, of course, could also still end up being the starting quarterback. We'll just have to wait and see for that game. At running back, though, we've got a couple of great running back options. Nicholas Singleton, 483 yards. That's 6.4 yards per carry and three touchdowns, plus 150 yards receiving and four receiving touchdowns. So Singleton has been an absolute beast both on the ground and in the air. Katron Allen has 509 yards, which is 5 yards per carry, and four touchdowns, plus 52 yards receiving and a receiving touchdown. So this undoubtedly is one of the best running back duos in the entire country. And then at receiver, you have Harrison Wallace, who has 362 yards and two touchdowns. Also, keep an eye on Omari Evans, who's had a pretty good season as well. And then tight end Tyler Warren has just been a superstar. 559 yards and four touchdowns, plus 40 yards rushing and a rushing touchdown. Undoubtedly, Warren has arguably been the best tight end in the country because there's other tight ends with similar numbers than him, but they come from lower levels such as FCS and other. He's the only tight end that's at this top level of college football doing what he is doing. So, incredible player. And now let's talk about some of the notable defensive players for Penn State. Abdul Carter, defensive end, 30 tackles, 9.5 tackles for a loss, 4 sacks, and 3 pass breakups. Zane Durant, defensive tackle, 18 tackles and 5 tackles for a loss. Tony Rojas, who's a linebacker, 31 tackles, 4 tackles for a loss, and an interception. Kobe King, also a linebacker, 34 tackles and 3.5 tackles for a loss. A.J. Harris, defensive back, 20 tackles, 3 pass breakups, and an interception. Jalen Reed, also a defensive back, he's a safety, 45 tackles, 4 tackles for a loss, 2 interceptions, 1 fumble recovery, and a touchdown. This is the Key Wheatley, who's another safety, 37 tackles, and an interception. So the defense is a lot of star players, guys that are really, really, really good. That's going to help keep Penn State in this game and maybe make Ohio State once again struggle on offense. But let's talk about this Ohio State offense here. Will Howard, he has been fantastic this season, even though he struggled a little bit in the Nebraska game. He has still been a significant upgrade over former Ohio State quarterback Kyle McCord, which, we saw what he did against Pittsburgh. Not going to talk too much about that. But Will Howard has 1,795 passing yards with a 74% completion percentage, 17 touchdowns to only 4 interceptions. He also has 91 rushing yards and 5 rushing touchdowns. So he came in supposedly was going to be a dual threat quarterback, just like he was with Kansas State. While he has scored on the ground, he's been able to show that he can be an elite level passer. At running back, he's got Quinshon Judkins, who has 520 yards. That's 6.4 yards per carry with 6 touchdowns. He does have a fumble, but he also has 76 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. And the other running back, Travion Henderson, has 449 yards, which is 7.2 yards per carry and 4 touchdowns. So Ohio State, they've got a pretty serious running back duo to match Penn State's running back duo. At wide receiver, super talented freshman wide receiver, former #1 overall recruit in his class, Jeremiah Smith, has 623 yards and 8 touchdowns. He also has a rushing touchdown, so he's quickly approaching 10 scores in just his true freshman season. Wide receiver Emeka Egbuka has 546 yards and 6 touchdowns. And then just to round out the receiving group, Parnell Tate has 334 yards and 2 touchdowns. So this receiver room, as usual for Ohio State, is loaded, and Will Howard has been super accurate. And on defense, despite what I just said about their offense, the defense is Ohio State's strength. They have so many superstar defensive players. Ty Hamilton is a defensive tackle with 26 tackles and 2.5 sacks. Tyleik Williams is a defensive tackle with 20 tackles and 4 tackles for a loss. Jack Sawyer is a defensive end with 22 tackles, 2.5 sacks, and a fumble recovery. JT Tuimoloau is a defensive end with 20 tackles, 7 tackles for a loss, and 4 sacks. Cody Simon is a linebacker with 33 tackles, 4 tackles for a loss, 4 pass breakups, and a fumble recovery. Davison Igbenosum is a defensive back with 20 tackles and an interception. Jordan Hancock is a defensive back with 26 tackles and 2 interceptions. Caleb Downs is a defensive back with 30 tackles, 5.5 tackles for a loss, and 3 pass breakups. Sonny Styles is a defensive back with 43 tackles and a fumble recovery. And Lathan Ransom is a defensive back with 28 tackles, 4 tackles for a loss, a fumble recovery, and a touchdown. This secondary is loaded, plus the front seven, really, really solid as well. Hands down, this is one of the best defenses in the country. Let's take a look at the series history. Ohio State leads the all-time series 24-14. They also played each other in the 1980 Fiesta Bowl, funny enough. And Ohio State currently is on a 7-game winning streak. The series used to be a lot closer, but a 7-game winning streak from Ohio State going back to 2017. And it's the longest streak for either side in this series. So, what do I think is going to happen? Is Ryan Day going to get the job done? He's done fantastic against unranked teams, not so much against teams in the top 5. But Ohio State seems to have Penn State's number. James Franklin just can't seem to figure out this Buckeyes team. But if he can, then Penn State will likely go undefeated. If you look at the rest of their schedule, it's not very hard at all. Ohio State still has a slightly more difficult schedule coming up. They have to play Indiana in their second to last game, who's looking like one of the best teams in the country, one of the best offenses in the country. And then they also play Michigan at home, which is still going to be somewhat of a tricky game. Penn State, they've got a super easy schedule the rest of the way. If they can get past Ohio State here, then their path to the college football playoff is so clear. However, I'm going to say Ohio State gets the win. I'm going to say Ohio State makes it 8 in a row. I think their defense is just so good. Penn State's offense, I expect to really struggle in this game. Ohio State's offense, I think, will do just enough. I'm going to say Ohio State goes on the road, wins this game by 7. They're going to make it 8 wins in a row over the Nittany Lions. And Penn State, after that, I believe they'll win out and they'll go 11-1. It'll just come down to tiebreakers whether they'll be able to make it into the Big Ten championship. They're probably going to have to hope that Ohio State loses to another team down the line, which, who knows, could be Indiana. But if that's the case, Indiana might be undefeated and go to the Big Ten championship. So it's going to be very tricky for Penn State to get into the CFP, but they would have an 11-1 record. It's going to be interesting to see what the committee thinks, but I've got Ohio State winning on the road by 7. Thank you guys so much for watching the College Sports Superfan. If you like this video, please share and subscribe and hit the thumbs up down below. And I'll see you guys next week.